Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Dive brought to you by NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra. United States President Donald Trump's feelings about immigrants in his country are not really a secret. The terror attack outside the White House now means that this policy is all set to become even tougher. Permanent pause, that's what Donald Trump has said, referring to third world countries as he is now closing the doors of Washington to migrants. Well, let's first understand what the term third world countries mean. The term third world countries is a broad and imprecise label for low and middle income developing nations primarily located in Africa, Asia, Latin America and parts of Oceania. The term was coined by a French demographer Alfred Sauvy in 1952 to refer to the non-aligned countries that were not part of the Soviet bloc or the Western bloc during the Cold War. The term was inspired by the Third Estate, the commoners of France before the revolution, and initially highlighted political non-alignment more than economic underdevelopment. Since most third world countries were economically poor and non-industrialized, it became a stereotype to refer to developing countries as third world. In political discourse, the third world term was often associated with being underdeveloped. China was labeled a third world for several decades in the 20th century before its robust development in the 21st century. Once the Cold War ended, this political classification stopped making sense. But the term lingered on and it took a different problematic meaning. People began using third world as shorthand for poor, underdeveloped or backward. And this created several issues. US President Donald Trump has announced a hardline reset of US migration policy, declaring that his administration will work to permanently halt immigration. Let's take a deeper look at what and why and how. Well, President Donald Trump plans to halt immigration from what he termed third world countries as part of a broader push to rebuild domestic systems, roll back unauthorized migration and tighten scrutiny on foreign nationals. Trump has stated that this push comes to allow the United States to fully recover and heal. He states that he will permanently pause migration from all third world countries and terminate all of the millions of Biden illegal admissions, including those, and I quote, signed by Sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and to remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States or does not love the country. He has also said that he will end all federal benefits and subsidies to non-citizens of US, denaturalizing migrants who pose a security risk. Trump added that his actions will help in reducing illegal and disruptive population, including those admitted through an illegal approval process. According to Trump, only reverse migration can fully cure this situation. Let's now take a look at the most underdeveloped countries in the world. Let's first take a look at the countries in Africa, and first one being Angola, another being Burundi, then Ethiopia, Mali, Niger and so on. If you take a look at some more in Asia, like starting off with Afghanistan, then going to Bangladesh, Cambodia and even Myanmar. Well, the USCIS said that it will review immigration status from residents of 19 countries identified in an executive order from June as countries of identified concern. The list, which Trump expanded in June, includes countries with either full or partial immigration restrictions. The countries with full restrictions are Afghanistan, Myanmar, the Chad, the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen. And then when we talk about the countries with partial restrictions, they are Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan and Venezuela. Some temporary work visas were still possible. The USCIS said that the new policy applies immediately and retroactively to all pending applications that were filed on or after the 27th of November 2025. Let's take a closer look at 5 of the Trump administration's most harmful immigration and refugee policies. The administration's approach began with an executive order declaring what it called an invasion of aliens, sealing off the southern border and barring asylum seekers from exercising their right to seek protection in the United States for as long as that suspension remains in place. Another major shift was the move to mandate detention for all migrants and asylum seekers apprehended on suspicion of violating immigration laws. This eliminated previous alternatives that allowed people to remain in the community under supervision, dramatically expanding the government's reliance on detention facilities. The administration also broadened the role of state and local police, empowering them to act as immigration officers for arrest and detention, and penalizing sanctuary jurisdictions by cutting federal funding to cities and states that declined to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. At the same time, a separate executive order deployed the U.S. Armed Forces to seal the border, carry out operations, and detain migrants, even authorizing the use of military facilities like the naval base at Guantanamo for holding people. And finally, the government expedited removal nationwide, allowing immigration officers to rapidly deport non-citizens anywhere in the country if they could not prove they had been continuously present in the United States for at least 2 years, stripping many people of access to immigration court hearings. What remains clear is that the conversation around migration, security, and national identity is far from over. Let's talk about this. Joining us on the show at this point in time is Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, former diplomat. Ambassador Dayal, appreciate you taking out the time, sir, and speaking with us. Well, I would not really blame Donald Trump, sir, for having such a knee-jerk reactions. Whether this is related to terrorism, whether this is related to ideological differences, or is it related to third world countries, the Americans do have a right to insulate themselves from any kind of harm precipitated by immigrants.
Well, Vineet, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You're right in saying that the United States has the right to decide whom it wants to allow to enter their country and whom it wants to keep out. Nonetheless, given the manner in which these new immigration policies have been executed or are being announced, there are several criticisms. And these criticisms of Donald Trump's immigration policies span legal, ethical, humanitarian, and economic concerns. Critics argue that the policies are discriminatory, violative of human rights and due process, and they inflict economic harm and would destabilize communities. One criticism, which is coming from human rights organizations, relates to the alarms of the revival of family detention and widespread reports of overcrowding, inadequate medical care, and legal access issues at detention facilities. And the critics argue that these sort of measures expose individuals, including children, to physical and psychological harm. Now, let me mention that Trump announced just yesterday, after the shooting incident which took place in Washington, D.C., and for which an Afghan national is being blamed, somebody whom the United States had given asylum to. There has been a lot of alarm because of that incident, and for this reason, Trump has announced that he would be tightening the entire process of immigration. In fact, he announced sweeping plans to tighten immigration rules, including a suspension on migration.
That's fair.
From
So
what
do you
he calls
think?
third world countries.
Do you think, sir, this is fair? Using the same brush to paint everybody. This person could be mentally unstable. No one knows.
Well, that is the criticism, because he is painting or tainting with one brush the entire community from where, which comes from a particular country or a particular region. So to do so is certainly discriminatory, and critics are pointing out that this is not fair at all. In fact, let me mention that apart from human rights concerns, there are legal and constitutional challenges, because the administration's efforts to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants have been blocked by federal courts. And there is also this criticism because of the use of controversial powers. The use of emergency or wartime authority, such as the Aliens Enemies Act of 1798 to expedite deportations has faced numerous legal challenges, and the legality of the actions which Trump has taken is going to be questioned. Then let me mention there are some economic and social impacts, because economists are pointing out that the reduction of immigrant workers, particularly in labor intensive sectors like agriculture, could have negative impacts on economic growth and productivity. So, reports have suggested that Trump's plans could decrease employment for American born workers and shrink the GDP. There is, of course, the aspect of the brain drain. The administration's policies, including increased scrutiny and visa revocations for students and workers, have made the US less attractive to international talent. And as you yourself were pointing out, these policies are discriminatory and in violation of civil rights. And for instance, many of these communities which are being targeted are from Muslim majority countries, and there is a concern that there is the ethical aspect which has been violated. Nonetheless, let's see what he wants to do, but nonetheless, there is no doubt that he is determined to implement his new immigration policies.
All right. Ambassador Dayal, appreciate you joining us, sir. Thank you so much for those insights and that perspective. We take a short break now. Be right back.